Her stories have changed so many times about what happens, when it happens, how it happens.
She was shaking, tears streaming. Then Ghislaine Maxwell uttered 2 words that sent shockwaves worldwide: Meghan Markle. What she revealed next left investigators speechless. 12 hours of testimony. Vanished. Sealed forever.
I have had a very complicated relationship with social media, as you can probably imagine.
The story began not with headlines or press conferences, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows when documents are released to the public, and people realize that half of what they expected to read simply isn't there anymore. When Ghislaine Maxwell's court testimony finally became available, legal experts and journalists sat down expecting revelations. They anticipated names, dates, locations, and the kind of detail that might finally connect all the pieces of one of the most disturbing criminal networks in modern history. Instead, what arrived was a document covered in black bars and blank spaces. Over 12 hours of Maxwell's spoken testimony never reached the public eye. 12 full hours. To put that in perspective, that represents more time than most people spend awake at work in a single day. It's longer than a transatlantic flight. It's an entire workday worth of words, and every single minute of it remains locked away in legal vaults. Court observers noted that these weren't random edits or standard privacy protections. The redactions appeared deliberate and systematic, targeting specific sections with surgical precision. Legal analysts familiar with sealed court documents have remarked that this level of removal typically indicates content considered either a threat to national security or so personally damaging to individuals that releasing it could trigger legal consequences far beyond the case itself. The obvious question became what was in those missing hours, and more importantly, whose names were being protected. According to individuals with knowledge of the court proceedings, the redacted portions didn't just contain passing mentions or vague references. They allegedly included detailed accounts of events, gatherings, and associations that connected Maxwell's world to figures far outside the expected circle of financiers and celebrities already known to be involved. These were said to be names that would surprise the public not because they were unknown, but because they seemed impossibly distant from the scandal itself. It was within this context that rumours began circulating in legal circles about one name in particular: Meghan Markle. Not as a criminal suspect, not as someone accused of wrongdoing, but as someone whose presence in certain social environments had allegedly been documented in Maxwell's testimony. The claim, whispered among those who had access to sealed materials, was that Meghan's name appeared not in one isolated mention, but across multiple sections of the hidden testimony. This wasn't about tabloid speculation or internet theories. This was about official court records that the public would never be allowed to read. For most people, Meghan Markle's story began in 2016 when news broke that she was dating Prince Harry. Before that, she was known primarily as an actress on a cable television series, someone with a modest career and a growing social media presence. The narrative presented to the world was straightforward. A working actress meets a prince, falls in love, and becomes part of one of the most famous families on Earth. It seemed like a modern fairy tale, the kind of story that fit neatly into public expectations about romance and destiny. But if Maxwell's sealed testimony contains what sources suggest it does, then that timeline becomes far more complicated. The implication would be that Meghan's path crossed with individuals connected to the Epstein network years before she ever met Harry. Not in passing at a public event or a random party, but in environments where the people present were carefully selected and the gatherings themselves operated far from public scrutiny. These were said to be settings where access mattered more than fame, where being noticed by the right person could open doors that talent alone never would. Understanding why this matters requires stepping back and looking at how Maxwell's world actually functioned. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just throw parties, they cultivated a network. People were introduced carefully, connections were made strategically. Young women, many of them aspiring models or actresses, were brought into social circles where wealth and power concentrated in ways most people never witness. For someone trying to build a career in entertainment, these environments might have seemed like opportunity, a chance to meet producers, investors, people who could change everything with a single phone call. The problem, of course, is that these opportunities came with expectations. The world Maxwell moved through wasn't simply about networking. It was transactional in ways that weren't always visible on the surface. Many of the young women who entered that world later described feeling like they were being evaluated, tested, and ultimately placed into roles that had nothing to do with their professional ambitions. Some realized what was happening and left. Others stayed longer, either because they didn't understand the dynamics at play or because the potential reward seemed worth the discomfort. If Meghan was indeed present in any of these environments, even briefly, it wouldn't necessarily mean she participated in anything illegal or even understood what was happening around her. Many people attended events connected to Epstein and Maxwell without realizing the full scope of what those gatherings represented. High-profile figures from politics, academia, and entertainment have all been photographed at Epstein-linked events, and most of them had no knowledge of the criminal activity taking place behind closed doors. Proximity doesn't equal complicity, but proximity does create knowledge. And knowledge, especially the kind gained in private settings, among powerful people becomes dangerous when those same people later face legal scrutiny. This is why the redactions matter so much. If Meghan was in rooms where certain conversations happened, or if she witnessed interactions between individuals who are now under investigation or have already been convicted, then her potential testimony becomes valuable. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she might remember details that others would prefer stayed forgotten. The decision to redact her name, if it truly appears in Maxwell's testimony, would therefore be less about protecting Meghan herself and more about protecting the individuals she might be able to identify or the events she might be able to corroborate. Legal experts have noted that witness protection in high-profile cases often extends beyond the obvious. It's not just about keeping witnesses safe from physical harm, it's also about preventing information from reaching the public that could derail other investigations, create diplomatic incidents, or expose connections that powerful institutions have spent years trying to bury. This brings the story full circle to that original question. Why were 12 hours of testimony removed from public view? The standard legal justification involves protecting ongoing investigations and preserving the privacy rights of individuals not charged with crimes. But observers of the case have pointed out that many of the redactions extended far beyond what would typically be necessary for those purposes. Entire narrative sections were removed, descriptions of events were blacked out, and names that might have provided context for understanding how Maxwell's network actually operated were scrubbed entirely. When information is hidden thoroughly, it creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, speculation grows. People begin asking questions that might never have occurred to them if the information had simply been released with standard privacy measures in place. The very act of sealing away 12 hours of testimony sent a message to anyone paying attention. Whatever was in those pages was considered too sensitive, too explosive, or too damaging to be shared with the public. And when Meghan Markle's name began appearing in connection with those sealed sections, it transformed her story from a simple tale of an actress becoming a duchess into something far more complex and troubling. The foundation had been set, the missing hours existed, names had been removed, and somewhere in those blacked-out pages, a connection allegedly existed that would challenge everything the public thought they knew about how Meghan Markle entered the royal family and what her life looked like before that moment. The first concrete indication that Meghan Markle's connection to the Epstein scandal might be more than speculation came from an unexpected source. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of the most prominent survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation, reportedly requested that Meghan be called as a witness in legal proceedings. This wasn't a casual suggestion or a name thrown out without consideration. When someone makes a formal witness request in a case of this magnitude, it carries weight. It suggests they believe that person has direct, relevant knowledge about the events or individuals being investigated. Virginia Roberts had become a central figure in exposing the criminal network that operated around Epstein and Maxwell. Her testimony helped bring down powerful men who had spent decades operating with impunity. She didn't make claims lightly, and she didn't request witnesses without reason. So when her legal team indicated that Meghan Markle could provide valuable testimony, it raised immediate questions about what exactly Meghan might know and how she came to know it. According to sources familiar with the witness consideration process, Virginia's interest in Meghan centered specifically around Prince Andrew. not in terms of any romantic connection, which has never been suggested, but regarding Meghan's alleged knowledge of Andrew's social activities and the circles he moved through during a particular period. The implication was that Meghan had been present in environments where Andrew, Maxwell, and others associated with them regularly appeared. These weren't official royal functions or public charity events. These were private gatherings, the kind held in exclusive venues where guest lists were carefully controlled, and what happened inside rarely made it into any public record. For the legal teams involved, this presented an enormous complication. Calling Meghan Markle as a witness would have created a media firestorm unlike anything the case had seen up to that point. By the time these discussions were happening, Meghan had already married Prince Harry and become the Duchess of Sussex. She was part of the British royal family, protected by palace protocols and represented by some of the most powerful legal minds in the United Kingdom. Having her testify under oath about her knowledge of Prince Andrew and his associations would have forced open doors that multiple institutions desperately wanted to keep closed. The practical challenges would have been immense. First, there was the question of whether Meghan could even be compelled to testify, given her position and residence. Then there was the matter of what her testimony might reveal, not just about Andrew, but about her own past and the nature of her early connections to people within that social network. Every question asked of her in a courtroom would have been analysed by journalists around the world. Every answer would have been compared against the public narrative of her life that had been carefully constructed through palace communications and media interviews. But the witness request also revealed something else. It suggested that Meghan's presence in these circles wasn't brief or incidental. You don't request someone as a witness because they attended one party years ago and might vaguely remember seeing someone across a crowded room. You request them because they have specific knowledge, because they were present for interactions that matter, because their testimony could corroborate or contradict other accounts. Virginia Roberts apparently believed Meghan could provide that kind of substantive information. The situation became even more complex with revelations that emerged from Ghislaine Maxwell herself. Speaking from prison, Maxwell made comments that added an entirely new dimension to the story. She claimed to have known Meghan personally, not in recent years and not through royal connections, but from much earlier in Meghan's life. According to Maxwell, Meghan had operated under a different name in her younger years. That name was allegedly Flower. This wasn't presented as a professional stage name or a character Meghan had played in her acting career. Maxwell described it as an alias, a name used in specific social environments that existed well outside the mainstream entertainment industry. The implication was that Flower was how Meghan was known in adult entertainment spaces and in the private circles that overlapped with Epstein-connected networks. These were environments where young women often operated under assumed names, partly for privacy and partly because the nature of those spaces required a degree of separation from their public identities. The use of nicknames and aliases was reportedly common in the world Maxwell and Epstein inhabited. It served multiple purposes. It protected the identities of both the women involved and the men who frequented these gatherings. It created a sense of exclusivity and discretion. And it allowed everyone involved to maintain plausible deniability if questions were ever asked. If someone was known only as Flower and no official records connected that name to a real identity, then proving that person's involvement became significantly more difficult. Maxwell's claim that she knew Meghan as Flower suggests a level of familiarity that goes beyond casual acquaintance. In those social circles, knowing someone's working name meant you had been in the same spaces, attended the same private events, or moved through the same network of contacts. It implied a shared understanding of how that world operated and what the unspoken rules were. For Maxwell to remember Meghan specifically and to recall the name she used indicates that their paths crossed multiple times, or that Meghan made enough of an impression to be memorable. What makes this particularly significant is the time frame. Meghan would have been in her 20s during the period when Maxwell and Epstein's network was most active. She was a struggling actress, working on small television roles and trying to establish herself in an incredibly competitive industry. For someone in that position, the opportunity to attend exclusive parties, meet wealthy and influential people, and be seen in environments where career-changing connections could be made would have been enormously appealing. Many young women in similar situations found themselves drawn into these circles without fully understanding what they were entering. The nickname Flower, according to those familiar with how these networks operated, would have been used among guests, entertainers, and contacts who moved through Epstein-linked environments. It appeared on private guest lists, in the memories of people who attended these gatherings, and in the informal records that documented who was present at various events. For investigators, these nicknames became important pieces of evidence because they helped establish patterns. They showed who was moving through these spaces regularly, who was being introduced to whom, and how the network functioned on a practical level. What unsettles those who have examined this aspect of the case isn't simply that Meghan might have used an alias. Many people in entertainment use stage names or professional pseudonyms. What matters is the context in which that name was allegedly used and what it suggests about Meghan's proximity to a criminal network. If Maxwell's account is accurate, then Meghan wasn't just someone who happened to be at one or two events where Epstein or Maxwell were also present. She was someone who had a recognized identity within those circles, someone who was known well enough to be remembered years later by one of the central figures in the operation. This also raises questions about what Meghan witnessed during that time. If she was present in these environments with any regularity, she would have observed how they functioned. She would have seen who attended, how introductions were made, and what kinds of interactions took place. She would have noticed which powerful men showed up repeatedly and which young women seemed to have particular access or influence. Even if she wasn't directly involved in any criminal activity, simply being present would have given her knowledge that could be valuable to investigators trying to piece together how the network operated. The challenge for investigators and legal teams was that pursuing this line of inquiry would inevitably lead to uncomfortable questions about Meghan's past. It would require examining her movements during those years, identifying which events she attended, and determining who introduced her to these circles in the first place. It would mean looking at her connections to people like Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson before she ever met Harry, and asking how those early relationships might have influenced her later trajectory. None of this would necessarily reveal criminal behavior on Meghan's part, but it would certainly complicate the carefully managed public image of an actress who became a modern princess. The decision was apparently made at some point that calling Meghan as a witness created more problems than it solved. The potential for damaging revelations, not just about her but about others connected to the royal family and the broader scandal, was simply too great. So despite Virginia Roberts' request, despite Maxwell's claims about knowing Meghan personally, and despite whatever information might have been contained in those redacted 12 hours of testimony, Meghan was never brought into a courtroom to answer questions under oath. The door that might have opened onto her early connections to the Epstein network remained firmly closed. But the questions didn't disappear. They simply moved into the background, waiting for the next revelation to bring them back into focus. Understanding how Meghan Markle's path might have intersected with royal circles years before meeting Harry requires looking at the social landscape of the early 2000s and 2010s. This was a period when Prince Andrew moved freely through elite gatherings, often accompanied by Ghislaine Maxwell and occasionally by Jeffrey Epstein. These weren't typically public events covered by photographers. They were private dinners, charity galas held in exclusive venues, and intimate parties where attendance was carefully curated. The people present at these gatherings were either exceptionally wealthy, politically connected, or part of the entertainment industry's upper echelons. Ordinary individuals didn't simply walk through those doors. Everyone present had either been specifically invited or brought along by someone with significant influence. During this time, Meghan was navigating her way through Hollywood as a working actress. She had landed roles on television shows, but nothing that made her a household name. Like many people in her position, she understood that success in entertainment often depended as much on connections as on talent. The industry ran on introductions, recommendations, and being in the right place at the right time. For an ambitious actress, attending exclusive events and meeting influential people wasn't just social activity, it was a career strategy. And according to multiple sources familiar with the social circuit from that era, Meghan did appear at gatherings where Prince Andrew and his circle were also present. These weren't occasions where Meghan would have been introduced as a guest of honor or seated at the head table. Her presence was more peripheral, the way many aspiring entertainers existed in those spaces. She would have been there as someone's guest, perhaps introduced as an up-and-coming actress, circulating through conversations and making impressions where she could. The atmosphere at these events followed particular unwritten rules. Charm mattered more than credentials. Being memorable was more valuable than being accomplished. and understanding how to navigate conversations with powerful men often determined whether future invitations would arrive. What made these gatherings significant wasn't just that they happened, but who attended them. Prince Andrew's social calendar during this period frequently overlapped with Maxwell's activities. She acted as a connector, someone who brought together wealthy financiers, entertainment figures, and individuals from political circles. Epstein, when he was present, operated similarly. They created environments where deals could be discussed informally, where introductions led to business partnerships, and where the boundaries between professional networking and personal entertainment became deliberately blurred. For someone like Meghan, being introduced into these circles would have seemed like a genuine opportunity. Meeting a member of the British royal family, even in a casual social context, represented access to a level of society that most people never glimpse. The same applied to meeting successful producers, wealthy investors, or influential figures from New York and London's elite social scenes. These were the kinds of connections that could transform a career or open doors that talent alone never would. Nothing about seeking those opportunities would have been unusual for someone in her professional position. But there's another figure whose role in all of this has remained largely unexplored in public discussions. Sarah Ferguson, known universally as Fergie, was Prince Andrew's ex-wife, but she maintained close ties to him and continued moving through many of the same social circles. The official story presented to the public was that Fergie first met Meghan shortly before the royal wedding, introduced through mutual friends as Harry's relationship with Meghan became serious. It was characterized as a pleasant first meeting between two women who would soon be connected through the royal family. However, sources familiar with the social landscape of that earlier period tell a different story. They claim that Fergie had known Meghan for years before the engagement, having crossed paths with her at various exclusive events during the time when Meghan was still building her acting career. Fergie was a regular presence at many of the same gatherings where Andrew, Maxwell, and Epstein appeared. She had maintained relationships with wealthy individuals who moved through those networks, and she understood how those social ecosystems functioned. Her financial difficulties over the years had made her particularly attentive to maintaining connections with people who had resources and influence. Some reports suggest that Fergie's relationship with Maxwell was more complex than simple friendship. There are claims that Fergie actually competed for influence within the same network of wealthy men that Maxwell cultivated. This wasn't about romantic rivalry, but about access and the advantages that came with being well connected to powerful people. Fergie had always been known for her ability to charm wealthy benefactors, and she moved through elite social circles with ease. If she and Meghan did know each other during this earlier period, it would have been in contexts where both women were navigating similar social territories, each trying to maintain or build their position within those exclusive environments. What adds another layer to this dynamic is the suggestion that Fergie later became protective of Andrew's image as Meghan's public profile began to rise. Some sources claim that Fergie actively worked to keep distance between Meghan and Andrew once Meghan started dating Harry. Whether this was motivated by genuine concern for Andrew's reputation, by personal rivalry, or by an understanding of what Meghan's past proximity to certain circles might mean, if it became public knowledge remains unclear. But the implication is that Fergie recognized potential complications long before they became obvious to others. The significance of these early connections became clearer when looking at how Meghan's life changed in the period just before meeting Harry. In 2015 and early 2016, something shifted. Meghan's social media presence became more polished and purposeful. Her public image evolved from actress to humanitarian, with increased focus on charitable work and global issues. Her circle of friends appeared to expand into more influential territory. And then came the meeting that would change everything. The venue was Soho House, specifically the Istanbul location that opened in April 2015. Soho House had become more than just a members club. It was a carefully cultivated networking ecosystem, places where creative professionals, wealthy investors, and influential figures from various industries could mix in environments designed to feel both exclusive and relaxed. The clubs were known for facilitating connections that might not happen in more formal settings. Memberships were selective, and being part of the Soho House world signaled a certain level of achievement and social currency. The man behind Soho House's expansion and influence was Ron Burkle, a billionaire with an extensive network spanning Hollywood, politics, and international business. Markle understood how to create environments where the right people met at the right times, and he had connections to figures across multiple elite circles, including some that quietly overlapped with the social networks Maxwell had cultivated. When Soho House opened its Istanbul location, the launch party was a carefully orchestrated affair. The guest list included influential figures from various sectors, people who traveled internationally and valued the kind of discreet networking opportunities these venues provided. Both Prince Harry and Prince Charles attended the Istanbul opening. Their presence wasn't unusual. Members of the royal family occasionally appeared at high-profile events connected to British business interests abroad. What became significant in retrospect was that Meghan Markle was also there. The official narrative described this as the beginning of Harry and Meghan's relationship, a chance meeting facilitated by a mutual friend in a glamorous international setting. It had all the elements of a contemporary romance story: the exotic location, the exclusive venue, the sense of serendipity. But many observers who understood how these social circles actually operated saw something different. They saw an introduction that happened in precisely the kind of environment designed to facilitate such meetings. They noted how quickly Meghan's public image evolved afterward, how seamlessly she transitioned from working actress to global figure, and how rapidly she moved from that initial meeting to becoming engaged to a prince. These transitions typically take years of careful relationship building, image management, and social positioning. Meghan accomplished it in what seemed like months. This raised questions about whether the meeting was truly spontaneous or whether it was facilitated by people who understood both Harry's world and Meghan's background. Markle's role in creating the environment where they met became a point of speculation. His connections to various elite networks, his understanding of how to position people for advantageous introductions, and his history of facilitating relationships between influential figures all suggested that chance might have played less of a role than the official story implied. What made this particularly interesting was the timing. Meghan met Harry at a moment when she was positioned perfectly for such a connection. She had enough fame to be interesting, but not so much that she came with overwhelming public baggage. She had cultivated an image as someone thoughtful and socially conscious, which aligned with Harry's own public interests. And according to whispered conversations among those familiar with the social dynamics at play, she had been introduced to the right people in the right way at the right time. For those watching from inside these circles, the progression from that Istanbul party to royal engagement didn't look like a fairy tale. It looked like a well-executed strategy, one that required knowledge of both worlds and the ability to navigate between them seamlessly. The question that lingers over this entire narrative is why Meghan Markle's name would appear in redacted court documents at all. If she wasn't accused of any crime, if she wasn't charged with wrongdoing, and if her involvement was supposedly peripheral, then what purpose would removing her name from public testimony serve? The answer, according to legal analysts and sources familiar with how these redactions work, has nothing to do with protecting Meghan herself. The redactions exist to protect the people who placed her in certain environments, the individuals who facilitated her access to exclusive circles, and the powerful figures who might be embarrassed or legally compromised if their connections to those networks became public knowledge. This distinction matters enormously. When court documents are redacted, judges and legal teams make decisions about what information could cause harm if released. That harm isn't always about the person being named. Sometimes it's about what that person's presence in a particular setting reveals about others. If Meghan attended private gatherings where certain powerful men were present, and if those gatherings were part of the broader network that Maxwell and Epstein operated, then documenting her presence there also documents who else was in those rooms. It creates a record of associations that many people would prefer remained buried. The networks that surrounded Epstein and Maxwell included financiers, politicians, entertainment executives, and members of international elite families. These weren't people whose reputations could withstand association with a sex trafficking operation. Many of them had spent years building public images as philanthropists, business leaders, or respected figures in their communities. Having their names connected to the same social events where young women were being recruited, evaluated, and placed would destroy those carefully constructed reputations instantly. So when Meghan's name appears in testimony, it's not just about her. It's about everyone else who was documented as being in proximity to her during that period. This is why sources suggest that Meghan carries what some have called dangerous knowledge. Not because she sought it out or because she was involved in criminal activity, but simply because she was present. She saw faces, She heard conversations. She observed the dynamics of rooms that operated according to rules most people never encounter. She would remember who attended certain events, who was introduced to whom, and what the atmosphere was like in spaces where power and influence concentrated in ways that were never meant to be documented or discussed publicly. For investigators, this kind of witness is both valuable and complicated. Valuable because they can corroborate other testimony and fill in gaps about how networks operated. Complicated because their testimony inevitably exposes people who weren't directly involved in crimes, but whose associations create uncomfortable questions. If Meghan were to testify under oath about her experiences during those years, she would be asked to identify people, describe events, and provide details about social interactions that occurred in private settings. Every name she mentioned would become part of the public record. Every event she described would be analysed by journalists and investigators. And every connection she revealed would create new lines of inquiry. The decision to seal portions of testimony that allegedly reference her suggests that those making the decision believed the risk of exposure outweighed the public's right to know. This kind of calculation happens regularly in high-profile cases, but the scale of the redactions in Maxwell's testimony indicated something beyond routine privacy protection. It suggested that the information contained in those sealed sections could damage reputations, compromise ongoing investigations, or expose connections between people and institutions that powerful forces wanted to keep hidden. From this perspective, Meghan's rapid rise from actress to duchess takes on different implications. Some observers have suggested that her elevation into the royal family wasn't simply a romantic fairy tale, but rather a strategic placement designed to move her away from environments where her presence had become potentially problematic. By becoming the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan gained protection, status, and distance from her previous life. She also became someone whose testimony would be infinitely more complicated to obtain, and whose public statements would be carefully managed by palace communications teams and powerful legal representatives. Whether this was intentional or coincidental remains a matter of speculation, but the effect was the same. Once Meghan married into the royal family, she became far less accessible to investigators, far less likely to be called as a witness, and far more insulated from the kinds of questions that her earlier associations might have generated. She also became someone whose past would be defended and protected by institutions with enormous resources and significant motivation to prevent damaging revelations. But protective walls, no matter how high, don't eliminate underlying tensions, and nowhere has that tension become more visible than in the current relationship between Prince William and Prince Harry. The public narrative has focused on sibling rivalry, disagreements about media strategy, and personal conflicts between their wives. But sources close to the palace suggest something deeper is at work. William has reportedly drawn a clear and non-negotiable boundary. He will not allow Meghan back into the royal family's inner circle. Not because of her public statements or her behaviour since leaving royal duties, but because of what her past represents and what her continued presence near the monarchy might expose. This position became publicly visible when Prince Andrew attempted to attend a church service at Balmoral. William confronted the situation directly and unambiguously. He made it clear that either Andrew would leave or he would, and Andrew departed. This wasn't about personal dislike or family drama. It was about William establishing that he would not tolerate the presence of anyone connected to the Epstein scandal anywhere near the royal family's public or private activities. Andrew's association with Maxwell and Epstein had already damaged the monarchy's reputation severely. William was determined to ensure that no further associations, no matter how indirect, would be allowed to contaminate the institution he will one day lead. Within this context, Meghan represents more than just Harry's wife. She represents a connection, however unintentional or innocent, to the same social networks that brought Andrew into disastrous proximity with criminals. William's reported stance isn't about punishing Meghan for things she may have witnessed as a young woman trying to build a career. It's about protecting the monarchy from any further association with a scandal that has already caused immense damage. From William's perspective, the risk of what Meghan knows, what she might be asked about, or what investigations might uncover about her past connections is simply too great to allow her back into the fold. This creates an impossible situation for Harry. He's caught between loyalty to his wife and the institutional demands of his family. He's aware that Meghan's past, regardless of what actually happened, carries implications that the monarchy cannot afford to embrace. And he's watching his brother draw lines that exclude not just Meghan, but by extension, Harry himself, from the future of the royal family. The conflict between the brothers isn't really about personal grievances. It's about fundamentally different approaches to managing the monarchy's relationship with a past that refuses to stay buried. The deeper story, the one that rarely gets told in media coverage of the royal family's internal conflicts, is about how institutions protect themselves when uncomfortable truths threaten to surface. The monarchy has survived for centuries partly by understanding when to cut ties, when to create distance, and when to ensure that certain stories never gain traction. William's reported determination to keep Meghan away from royal circles represents that institutional instinct in action. It's not personal vindictiveness, it's calculated preservation. But every attempt to bury a story creates pressure. And according to those who have followed this case closely, the pressure has been building for years. The sealed testimony, the witness requests that were never fulfilled, the redacted names and missing hours. All of it points to information that powerful people desperately want to keep hidden. The question has never been whether that information exists. The question has been when and how it might finally emerge. That emergence may have already begun. Maxwell's comments from prison about knowing Meghan as flower weren't made casually. They were deliberate statements from someone who understands exactly what kind of reactions such revelations would create. Whether Maxwell is motivated by spite, by a desire to deflect attention from her own crimes, or by some other calculation, doesn't change the impact of her words. She has placed Meghan's name directly into a conversation about networks, aliases, and private gatherings that operated in the shadows of legitimate society. And this leads back to where many believe the story truly began. Not in a Soho house in Istanbul, not at a charity event in London, but on a yacht. Multiple sources familiar with the social circuits of that era have whispered about elite gatherings held on luxury yachts, invitation-only events where the normal rules of society didn't apply. These weren't pleasure cruises or vacation trips. They were carefully orchestrated gatherings where powerful men, silent transactions, and unspoken expectations all existed under the cover of privacy that only the open ocean can provide. It was allegedly at one of these gatherings that Meghan first entered the world she would later be accused of knowing too well. A world where appearances determined opportunity, where being noticed by the right person could change everything, and where young women were assessed, tested, and positioned based on their willingness to navigate environments that most people would find deeply uncomfortable. The details of these yacht gatherings have emerged slowly over years of investigation into Epstein's network. They were places where boundaries blurred, where the line between networking and exploitation became invisible, and where everyone present understood that discretion was the price of admission. For a young actress trying to break into an industry built on connections and access, such an invitation might have seemed like validation, a sign that she was being taken seriously, that she had caught the attention of people who mattered. Only later, perhaps much later, would the true nature of those gatherings become clear. And by then, the connections had been made, the faces had been seen, and the knowledge had been gained that would follow her for years to come, eventually landing her name in sealed court documents and whispered conversations about what she might know and who she might be able to identify. The yacht represents the origin point, the moment where one path ended and another began. Everything that followed, the social climbing, the strategic positioning, the carefully managed image, and eventually the meeting with Harry, all of it traces back to that initial entry into a world that operated according to rules most people never encounter. And now, years later, as more voices speak from prison cells and courtrooms, as more documents get unsealed, and more testimony comes to light, that origin story refuses to stay buried. The storm that allegedly began on that yacht is rising again, and the question facing everyone involved is no longer whether the truth will emerge, but how much of it the public is finally ready to hear.